Alright mate, welcome back to the channel. You're watching VG Vault, and today we're going to be talking about my personal game of the year every year for the last 10 years. With this year's official ceremony just around the corner, now feels like the perfect time to dive into which game was my favourite game every year over the last decade. I've decided to start in 2013 so I can have 10 solid submissions. As the year's not out yet, I haven't had a chance to play all of the games that I think would be a contender for me this year. But at the end of the video, I will be giving you my prediction for what will actually win Game of the Year this year, as well as what would be my personal pick. So sit back, relax, grab a tasty beverage, and let's get into my Game of the Year, a decade in retrospect. Starting off with 2013, Ni no Kuni, Wrath of the White Witch. Some of these years were much harder to choose from than others, and especially 2013 was a crazy year for video games. Assassin's Creed Black Flag, GTA 5, The Last of Us. We were really spoiled for choice in the gaming world. But ignoring critical acclaim and trying to follow my heart, I landed on Ni no Kuni. Ni no Kuni was a slam dunk for anyone that likes three things: Studio Ghibli, monster catching games, and JRPGs. Ni no Kuni achieved an incredible feat in managing to feel fresh and nostalgic at the same time. Even a decade ago, the visuals were incredible, leading to a really bright aesthetic and Studio Ghibli's patented art style at the helm. It delivered a fresh take on old school JRPG combat with a hybrid system that lets you have complete control over your character, but all of your skills and spells were on a cooldown timer, mimicking some of the elements of classic turn-based games. The story contained real depth and jeopardy, with even some of the earliest parts in the game containing heart-wrenching moments. These really connected you to the characters and the journey that you were about to set out on. The monster capturing and raising mechanics were a mixed bag for me. Some of the designs were awesome, but the balancing was really bad. Unless you were really committed to a creature for its design, chances are towards the end of the game, most people probably had exactly the same team. I was slightly disappointed in the evolution mechanics too. Each different stage amounted to little more than a palette swap, with some additional assets for most of the monsters. But ultimately, those minor niggles pale in comparison to everything else that made this game an absolutely fantastic addition to my library. The overall adventure was an instant classic, and it has stayed with me all of this time. Couldn't believe it when they ditched the monster raising mechanics in the second game. Maybe they were going to get sued by Nintendo. 2014, Assassin's Creed Unity. 2014 was definitely a quieter year. For me, personally, there were only two other games that I considered for my top pick for this year: South Park: The Stick of Truth and Dragon Age Inquisition. Now, if I was basing this purely on what I'd actually played that year, Unity wouldn't even have come close. I'm sure most of you remember that this game was a broken mess when it came out. But in retrospect, at the very least from a gameplay perspective, Assassin's Creed Unity has actually become my favourite Assassin's Creed game. For me, it represents the peak of what Assassin's Creed was culminating from its original format before the switch to the RPG style games happened. Paris was beautiful and incredibly well modelled by French developers Ubisoft. They actually did such a good job that upon the tragic fire in Notre Dame, the French government actually reached out to Ubisoft for their digital model of the building. It was so accurate that they wanted to use it for the reconstruction. The two shining lights in Assassin's Creed Unity are its parkour and its combat. The parkour was deft and elegant, giving you so much control over your character compared to previous titles. I spent a lot less time running up 3 feet of wall over and over again because my aim wasn't perfect, and the parkour up and parkour down systems that they implemented felt really smooth and intuitive. The combat was great too. There was a myriad of different weapons available, and it had a really slow and deliberate feel. Black Flag was an amazing game, but it was far too easy just to mash your way through it, and it never really presented much in the way of a challenge. Assassin's Creed Unity made me use more caution and play more tactically, especially in the early game, where a few loose axe swings from a heavy would have you down pretty quickly. The story doesn't hold a candle to my narrative pinnacle of the series in Assassin's Creed 2. Arno was a half-decent protagonist, but certainly no Ezio Auditore. I enjoyed the Animus moments that had you leaping through time periods to seeing some later and present day settings, teasing us with the fabled modern day Assassin's Creed that we all thought the series was going to end on all the way back in 2012. Overall, especially now, Assassin's Creed Unity is an incredible game, and although I am actually a fan of the new RPG style games, Ubisoft could take so many cues from this one to make a game that some of the fans of the older games would gravitate towards. Honestly, if they released a 60 FPS 4K patch for this game right now, I'd be straight back in. Oh yeah, it had some multiplayer too, but all that did was get in the way of me wanting to platinum it, so the less said about that the better. 2015, The Witcher 3, Wild Hunt. While I was writing the script for this video, I barely got 3 games into 2015's release slate before The Witcher 3 came up, and I immediately stopped looking. This is hands down one of my favourite games of all time, and I will contain myself to not add another 10 minutes to this video just talking about it. This game had everything, literally everything. The visuals, stunning. The story, epic. Engaging side quests and characters, absolutely. The combat, fluid, varied, and weighty. World building, check. Deep customization, yes sir. A tactical strategy card game that was so good it prompted me to order the DLC so I could have a real set and play it with my friends. You better believe it. The first game with an active dynamic beard growth system? Oh yes. Even the DLC content was literally brilliant, adding 35 plus hours of new content on top of what was already an enormous world. The only negative I can even think of for this game was the fact that over the course of a decade, it's only become slightly less replayable because of the lack of options that comes with the main character being fully written and not a customizable, faceless chosen one like most RPGs. This meant that although there are ways to play Geralt differently, there aren't such strong build options, as you're always going to be using your swords, a bit of magic, and your potions and alchemy, and a few minor tools like bombs and stuff. There's something to be said in the idea that The Witcher 3's success influenced Ubisoft's decision to move Assassin's Creed over to an open-world RPG format. And like I said, personally, I like them, but they are totally devoid of the charm and depth that stop huge games like The Witcher 3 from feeling bloated. The care and attention that went into every quest and interaction is plain to see. Sometimes you do a side quest, make something that feels like a completely arbitrary decision, and move on, only to be revisited by your choice in that quest much later in the game, and to see in real time how your decision altered its course of events. My friend used to call me and say, so I'm playing The Witcher 3 and I've reached this point and I've got this choice, which is the right decision? And I literally just replied by saying, what would you do? Because although there are what could be seen as favourable options for the game's ending, many of the choices in the game didn't have a clear black or white, good or bad outcome. Someone always benefited and someone almost always suffered. For my money, this level of writing hasn't really been matched since. They did a great job with branching paths and decisions in their later title, Cyberpunk 2077. But The Witcher 3 was, is, and may well always be in a league of its own. 2016, Dragon Ball Xenoverse 2. Now this was a tricky one because Final Fantasy 15 came out this year and I really love that game. But if I'm being honest, I only played it through the once. Dragon Ball Xenoverse 2 on the other hand is a game I bought on a second console and a game that I periodically go back to when I'm looking for something that's just fun and non-committal. I always loved Dragon Ball games, going back to Final Bout on the PS1 and the Budokai and Tenkaichi series on the PS2. One of my favourite things back then was the what-if scenarios that were largely in Budokai Tenkaichi 2. One time I beat Majin Buu with Krillin and skipped a whole section in the story, and that left me with more characters and health to play the next part. I also loved the what-if fusions. Yamcha and Tien's fusion was cursed nightmare fuel, but it was fun just to experiment with these mechanics. Xenoverse 2 is literally a what-if Dragon Ball game. You create your own character and fight through classic moments throughout the Dragon Ball anime, though time-traveling shenanigans have set things off course, and it's your job to make sure the outcome remains the same. The character creator was great, with a good choice of races to choose from. I usually opted for the classic boring Saiyan build, but later created my own Frieza race character that I absolutely love. After playing so many games that just chronologically take you through the paces, it was really refreshing to play a Dragon Ball game that actually felt new. It was absolutely stuffed with content, and the developers did a great job of releasing regular free DLC, as well as more paid content. So every time I went back, there was something new, even though I never bought any of the monetized add-ons. Dragon Ball Sparking Zero looks great, and I will be sure to give that a bash at some point, but as someone who loves building and customizing characters, I'm sure I'll continue to come back to Xenoverse 2 until we get a sequel. 2017. Breath of the Wild. You've got to appreciate a moment when the entire world comes together on something. And a unilateral love of Zelda Breath of the Wild was exactly that. Now, truth be told, prior to Breath of the Wild, the only Zelda game I'd ever dipped my toe into was Majora's Mask. And honestly, only for a limited time, as I'd never owned a N64 or a GameCube or any home Nintendo console until I got my Switch. But regardless, I was just as excited as everyone else by the frankly sublime offering that was Nintendo's latest entry into its decades-old franchise. It's no secret that the Switch isn't exactly a powerful console, so Breath of the Wild's incredible visuals are almost entirely thanks to the team's stylistic choices in terms of art design. They took what was starting to become a stale genre in open-world action RPGs and revitalized it with atmosphere and a sense of genuine discovery. Foregoing icons and a busy on-screen HUD, this iteration of Zelda implemented a world that ensured you unearthed its locations and treasures by means of true, genuine exploration and discovery. It provided quest markers as an absolute bare minimum, but the beauty of Breath of the Wild was the adventures you had on the journey. not the destination. The pseudo-survival mechanics ensure you partook in the wide variety of weapons by attaching a finite durability system to each individual piece. You could never get comfortable with a weapon you liked, and you were incentivized to use it sparingly for bosses or large mobs. If you used your favorite weapon haphazardly on easy enemies or even destructible environments, that precious durability meter would deplete, bringing it ever closer to permanent destruction. This was a double-edged sword for me personally. I would love to have been able to repair some weapons to keep them with me for longer periods, but I understand that this mechanic was an intrinsic part of what made the game tick. So ultimately, I can't be mad at it. The early complaints I heard from the existing Zelda community were geared towards the game's dungeons. Supposedly, they didn't live up to previous iterations of the classic Zelda trope. And for Breath of the Wild, I can see that they were all quite similar in design. But as a newcomer to the series, this didn't bother me too much. The story was sparse but impactful, forgoing lengthy word-filled cutscenes and exposition. Zelda Breath of the Wild is a testament that making a good game, or any piece of art for that matter, is more often than not about what you don't do rather than what you do. 2018. Marvel's Spider-Man. 2018 was one of the best years in gaming, arguably of all time. The year that gave us Sony's new take on God of War, alongside what is always a huge industry milestone in a Rockstar release. That, of course, was Red Dead Redemption 2. But for all the immense quality that year brought, my heart was stolen by a game I'd been waiting for since I first played Activision's take on the character on the PS1 in the early 2000s, Marvel's Spider-Man. I truly believe that having this game as a PlayStation exclusive was one of the big nails in the coffin for Xbox. Spider-Man is arguably the most popular Marvel character of all time, and he's up there with the greats like Batman and Superman in terms of overall superhero fandom. I myself have been an avid Spider-Man fan since I discovered the iconic Spider-Man animated series from the 90s in my youth, and the quick-witted, wall-crawling, friendly neighborhood superhero, alongside his stellar rogues gallery, translates so well to video games, it's incredible. I played every Spider-Man game that was released up until the PS3. That's where they started to veer away from the open city sandbox titles and leaned more into linear story-driven games. Until Insomniac Spider-Man, my absolute favourite Spider-Man game was Ultimate Spider-Man on the PS2. But this one takes the cake as the best Spider-Man game of all time, and for me, it's not even close, even including the two most recent entries in the series. The finesse they've achieved with web swinging, alongside the best and most engaging combat the series has ever featured, makes for the perfect street-level superhero game. The narrative, cast of side characters, and voice acting were all completely on point, which is what we've come to expect from most Sony-exclusive titles these days. This game gave me my first ever Platinum trophy, and opened the door to me getting more out of my game collection in general by trying to do the same thing with other games. Well done, Insomniac. Take a bow. 2019. Days Gone. It often seems as one year gives us a plethora of award-winning titles, following year experiences somewhat of a hangover. My ultimate pick for 2019 is actually Days Gone, which again is quite firmly in retrospect, as I wasn't hyped by its release and I didn't pick it up at launch. This seems to be the unfortunate state of affairs for this game in general, as a sequel was cancelled due to poor sales figures. Looking back, that's an enormous shame. Days Gone was not the most original idea out there, but it did what it did extremely well. It was an open-world action-adventure game featuring the iconic voice talent and mocap performance from Sam Witwer. I previously released a video titled 5 Gaming Series That I Want Brought Back. Head over and watch that video for a slightly more in-depth assessment of my time with this game. But in the end, this one was still comfortably my pick for best game of 2019. 2020. Ghost of Tsushima. Damn PlayStation, you get my top pick for 3 years in a row. These guys were absolutely cooking over this time period. This game isn't just the best game of 2020 for me, it's one of my favourite games ever. Ghost of Tsushima is the best Assassin's Creed game from the last decade. Obviously, I'm joking, but seriously, after a few years of commercially underwhelming Assassin's Creed releases, Ghost of Tsushima was a shot in the arm to people who enjoyed this kind of concept. Set in Japan during the Mongol invasion, you play as Jin Sakai, nephew to the Lord of the island of Tsushima. When the Mongols arrive and begin to take over, your goal is to acquire a brand new set of skills, build up your strength, find allies, and drive them from your home. The world that Sucker Punch created for this game is stunning. How they achieved these visuals on a standard PS4 and managed to keep the load times to an absolute minimum is nothing short of a miracle. Ghost of Tsushima offers 2 distinct playstyles that can be focused on or interwoven. Noble samurai sword combat, or dishonorable stealth and subterfuge gameplay. This game offers you a katana, a tanto, a bow, and a set of tool-based weapons and utilities such as kunai and smoke bombs. The sword combat in this game is some of my favourite to date. The parry system is excellent, giving you real control of the combat and ensuring that button mashing will likely always be the end of you. But the game was not so challenging as to put itself up there with the likes of Sekiro or Dark Souls. The story is simple but told elegantly, and including some gut-wrenching moments that are better left played than explained. Start of the third chapter, that's all I'm saying. Everything you do in this game was fun. Exploring, combat, side quests, and even just taking your time traversing the open world looking for collectibles was made enjoyable by the sheer quality and beauty of Tsushima's gorgeous landscape. Not a single bad thing to say about this game. It was perfect, down to every last detail. 2021. Tales of Arise. Again, another hangover year, but 2021 managed to introduce me to a long-running series that I'd previously swept to the side. After playing Tales of Arise, I will be sure to keep a close eye on any future installments in the series. Tales of Arise is the most recent entry into the Tales series that dates all the way back to Tales of Symphonia on the GameCube. Some of the older games employed this slightly odd side-facing camera for the combat, and I never really was able to gel with it. Tales of Zestiria moved away from this, I think, but I just couldn't get into the story for that one. Tales of Arise, on the other hand, seems to have abandoned many of its previous tropes in favour of engaging a wider audience, and at least in my own case, it worked. The anime art style was absolutely incredible. The combat is now super fast and much more free than it used to be. The story was great and the cast of side characters were all interesting and made it worth exploring your relationships with them. My one hang-up with this game was the amount of static dialogue cutscenes. I've mentioned this in a previous video and it still holds true here. But luckily in this case, the rest of what Tales of Arise had to offer was so engaging that for the most part, I didn't mind skip reading through what I thought I could do without and just focusing on main story beats. 2022. Elden Ring. I was never much of a masochist when it came to gaming. My overall mantra was, if it's not fun, why bother? I dabbled in a few of FromSoft's previous works, such as Dark Souls 3, Bloodborne, and Sekiro Shadows Die Twice. But otherwise, I just considered the Soulsborne genre to be too far beyond my skill level to put that much of my time into it. Then came Elden Ring. I love open-world fantasy RPGs. And while I never originally intended to play this one, I eagerly followed its launch build-up by watching the trailers and looking for news every now and again. I was initially interested by the involvement of A Song of Fire and Ice author George R.R. Martin. I'd never come close to understanding FromSoft's distinct storytelling style before. Just knowing that Martin was helming the lore for this game got my spidey senses tingling. Normally, when I follow a game, I've got a reasonably solid idea of if I'm going to buy it or not before it comes out. But I literally bought Elden Ring on the day it came out as if I was possessed by the frenzied flame itself. I was genuinely a bit nervous stepping into the Lands Between on my own for the first time, still questioning why I'd made the plunge in the first place. But after a few short hours, it's an understatement to say that I was hooked. Even after beating the first few main bosses and discovering most of Limgrave, I was thinking to myself, I'm sure I'll get stuck at some point and put it down, but either way I've had a great time, so it's worth it. But that moment just never came. Kept on pushing and pushing. I'd never experienced anything like the pure gaming ecstasy of beating one of Elden Ring's myriad bosses, and every time I put one down, I instantly went hunting for the next one. My anxiety was replaced with grit and determination. Each death only made me more determined to overcome my current obstacle and run blindly into the next one. Elden Ring changed the way I play and look at video games forever, and I will always be grateful to FromSoft for not giving in to the public opinion that their game should contain some sort of easy mode, but instead making their games more accessible via certain types of builds. I started off with a classic melee build, but soon restarted and sidelined into an intelligence dexterity build, which hardcore fans will tell you is the game on easy mode. I had all the tropes of a player who wasn't able to get good. I used spirit ashes and often called in help from other players to help me tackle particularly difficult bosses. My first time beating Millennia was with the aid of a gentleman who simply went by Magical John. I'm not a big social gamer, so I don't know Magical John. I don't have him as a friend on my PSN account, but I will never forget him for helping me overcome the single most difficult gaming experience I'd ever faced. Aside from the gameplay itself, Elden Ring is a masterclass in world design and storytelling. To this day, I often go to sleep listening to hours-long Elden Ring lore videos on YouTube. As a side note, if you like that kind of thing, you should check out Smotown on YouTube for his comprehensive Elden Ring lore videos. The depth of the story is not immediately visible just from working your way through the game, but the people who have taken the time to unravel its myriad mysteries have unearthed a deep, twisting, and visceral tale, worthy of the man who gave us moments like the Red Wedding. As of right now, I hold the Platinum for the PS4 version of the game, and I'm 75% on the way to the Platinum for the PS5 version of the game, only needing one more solitary playthrough in order to attain it. You can come at me in the comments and call me a scrub for taking the easy way out, but I don't care. Playing through Elden Ring is one of my most memorable gaming achievements to date, and I still have Shadow of the Erdtree to eventually tackle, so long may the punishment continue. 2023. Star Wars Jedi Survivor. Extended Star Wars content has been a mixed bag in terms of quality since the Disney takeover. There are many mixed opinions on the various movies and TV shows that have been made after George Lucas parted ways with the company. But regardless of any of my opinions on those, and boy do I have some opinions, I can confidently say that Star Wars Jedi Survivor is, for me at least, the best of the bunch. I played EA's first more Dark Souls-inspired entry into the series, Jedi Fallen Order, and really enjoyed it, but I couldn't escape a mild frustration with what I felt could have been a better told story and a more fully explored world. Both of these issues are addressed in abundance in the subsequent Jedi Survivor. After a significant time skip, Cal Kestis returns to the fore, a more mature and robust character, at times struggling to stay true to the dogmatic nature of the light side of the Force. Old characters are brought back, many new characters are introduced, and a whole story is woven into the era that Darth Vader and the Inquisitors hunted down the Jedi to extinction. As for the world itself, introducing a hub-style planet was exactly the tonic that Fallen Order needed. It still has its Dark Souls-style interconnected levels, but when you start to feel fatigued by this type of gameplay, there's a huge planet with a much more open landscape to fall back on. A much more engaging home base was introduced in the way of a bar, where new characters you met along the way congregate, and new merchants appear inside the bar itself and outside in the surrounding area. This gives a much better sense of progression compared to only seeing a few new plants on your ship through the entirety of the last game. The main pull, though, of course, is the combat. It's been well refined and expanded greatly, with the addition of 2 new lightsaber styles in the form of a blaster and a two-handed stance. Parrying feels great and responsive, and the lightsaber battles throughout the game are epic, though still too few in my humble opinion. I especially enjoyed the addition of the bounty hunter hunting, with a nice surprise cameo for anyone who makes it to the end of that particular questline. Jedi Survivor is an all-round good game and my personal pick for Game of the Year 2023. It didn't tear up any trees when it launched, but it's exactly the kind of game we need more of right now. A safe, solid game that's not trying to reinvent the wheel and is just good old Star Wars style fun. 2024. Predictions. As for what I think will actually win Game of the Year 2024, it's Black Myth Wukong. It took the world by storm when the trailer dropped, and its subsequent release has seen it being the most concurrently played game on Steam of all time. That's quite impressive. It's a linear action-adventure game that is quite focused on telling its own story rather than offering lots of choices. But so far, the reviews have been outstanding and it looks really, really good. Though as far as what I think my personal favourite game of this year will be, I'm giving it to Metaphor ReFantazio. The developers of the Persona and Shin Megami Tensei series, Atlus, dived heavily into their own iconic style and used it to create a fantasy RPG that honestly looks out of this world. It reeks of Persona and looks to share many of the things that makes that series so special, while also looking fresh and unique. I played the demo for the first few hours, and if that is anything to go by, then I think this game is going to be something really, really special. I might even drop a review when I finished it for the first time. And that is that. My Game of the Year, a decade in retrospect. Thanks so much for watching the video. Drop a like if you enjoyed it, a dislike if you didn't, and if you're feeling generous, hit that subscribe button. Keep it classy. Peace.